So I'm really a guy who lives out in the woods. Don't have any of those special fancy titles. But I am a father, and I want my children to live in a Christian nation. And I want my children to live in a Christian nation.
All right, well, welcome to the live stream. I haven't done this in quite a while, so hopefully all the gadgets are working properly. It's really hard to tell from here. If you're in the chat, let me know. But yeah, I am here to talk about our Reformed Christian Politics Study Report, or the study report on Reformed Christian Politics. If you don't know already, it's something we published. It's at reformedchristianpolitics.org, so you can download it there, or you can read it again or skim it or do whatever you want to do with it. So who are the we? So it's me and Zach Garris and Sean McGowan. We put together a little report for people to read. It's just a little. I mean, it could have been longer. I mean, really, it could have been at twice as long, but we decided to keep it, just over 200 pages, just for fun. And I thought it would be good to give, I don't know, maybe every Thursday I would talk about it for maybe an hour, and I would respond to your questions. So if you're in the chat, of course, you can give me questions, and that would be grateful for that. So I think, to begin, the big question is, where did this sort of thing come about? I think pretty much very few people knew that we were doing this. There were a few people knew that we were going to write this report. But they all kept quiet from what I could tell, because I think it surprised everyone last Friday. And I mean, why, I guess the question is, why did we put this thing together in the first place? Well, several months ago, Zach, Sean, and I were walking down a lonely path, literally a path together. And we started talking about the state of the Reformed world regarding politics. And each of us have our interests. I, do political theory. Sean is really interested in history, particularly the history of Southern Presbyterians. And Zach is also interested in that history, but also has done work on modern two kingdom theology, or Reformed two kingdoms, and theonomy and spirituality of the church. And so we thought that, well, you know what? Why don't we all just kind of take our interests and put this together and see what happens in the end? Like, we have all of these sort of complaints about the way we think about politics in the NAPARC world. So why don't we all get together, stop complaining about it and put it down on paper and kind of present to the Reformed world what we think is a more proper understanding of politics in these various areas that we are specialized in. And I think the product turned out great. I mean, in terms of, I'm actually very happy with my contribution, which would be the Reformed Political Theory chapter and the summary chapter and the introduction. And Sean is an expert on the American Presbyterian history, so he did that chapter. And then Zach is really good on spirituality of the church, which of course is a topic of ecclesiology, not political theology. That's kind of misunderstood, it seems. And also theonomy and two kingdom theology. So we put this together. So obviously I have my critiques and understanding of all those things, though I'm not an expert on American Presbyterian history. But Zach certainly has a better theological understanding of the problems with the so-called radical two kingdom theology. And he was able to explain those better than I could, and some of the other things as well. So as it came together, when we first thought of the idea of sort of serving the Reformed world with what our understanding of politics, we didn't really have a clear sort of thesis. We didn't think we didn't first say it's going to be civil government promoting to religion. That was not the first thing that we started thinking at, as if everything conformed to that. Really, we just had these general problems with the way politics is handled or understood in the Reformed world, particularly in the NAPARC world. And again, as I said, we have our own areas of interest. So we begin submitting chapters. We begin looking at each other's work. And we realize that really our thesis statement, if you put them all together, the thesis statement is actually civil government ought to promote true religion. And so after all these things kind of came together and I looked at it and we talked about it, that's what we came up as a thesis. And that's where I then wrote the introduction, and we just realized that's what we were thinking the whole time. And so that's our thesis. Our thesis is the civil government ought to promote true religion. It sounds like the thesis that James Baird stated, even though, of course, that's just the historic position. Doesn't overlap with evangelical dark clubs. Yeah. So it doesn't, you just lost my train of thought. It's like James Baird had that, promoting true religion, but that's, of course, the older idea. And that's actually the proper place to start when it comes to the involvement of government and in religion. You have to start with that general principle of government ought to promote true religion. So then you can go down into the various ways in which government can promote true religion in very specific, in the more specified or specific ways. And that's how I present it in the introduction, is to say there's the genus, species, and individual acts of government in promoting true religion. I think that's just the proper way to present it, describe it, and I'll get into that in a second. So some of the things that we have talked about, Zach, Sean, and I, when we thought through what are the issues we want to present, what are the issues we want to bring up and solve and resolve and present in a better way than how it's been in the last several decades, the things that we thought of were that there was there's just a general confusion that's gone back, I think, for several decades. It's actually strange when you think about it, is you didn't have too many people looking back whom I would consider a classical Protestant when it comes to politics. You'd have people who are, theonomists, and theonomists are, of course, kind of all over the place when it comes to their understanding of things, which is a bit ironic. And then you have certain, Kuyperians, and a lot of theonomists are Kuyperians as well. But then you have the sort of James K.A. Smith style of neo-Calvinism / Kuyperianism. You have that. And then on the other side of these, you can kind of lump those guys somewhat together in certain first principles. They tend to be more anti-dualist. So you got the theonomists, the general Kuyperians, and then some post-millennialism wrapped up into that. And the other side, you call them the dualists, which would be what came to be the two kingdom theology movement, which I don't know exactly when that started. I know Michael Horton was writing things in like the late 80s, early in his career in the 90s against, quote, transformationalism. And then you get Van Drunen, and then you get like Scott Clark, and then you get D.G. Hart, and they're writing things about this idea of the two kingdoms. And many people were excited about that because it genuinely did actually recover something that was ubiquitous within the Reformed world from the 16th century, 17th century, 18th century. And it was kind of lost within the 20th century. So it was kind of exciting. Hey, we can finally have this political theology that fits fairly well with the Reformed tradition. And oh, by the way, if we just tweak it a little bit here, it promotes secularism, or a secular government, or a government that has no cognizance of religion. And so for many years, we have this weird world where, in my estimation, none of them perfectly map onto the Reformed tradition. Because on one side, on the theonomist, Kuyperian, anti-dualist side, well, I'm sorry, but the dualisms, or the distinction of nature and grace, distinction of, civil and spiritual, distinction of earthly and heavenly life, all those things are just ubiquitous in the Reformed tradition. And so in that sense, they've moved away from the Reformed tradition. But at the same time, the theonomists were right that you can actually use the Mosaic law in crafting civil policy. So in some ways, they were actually right. On the other side, you have the two kingdom guys who are right about the twofold kingdom concept as it was in the 16th century and developed in the 17th century. And they affirm natural law, which, is ubiquitous within the Reformed tradition. So that's just going to be true. I'm sorry if you don't like that, but it's true that I've never seen anyone in the Reformed tradition before the 19th century, before the 20th century, reject natural law. Now, some may not mention it, but I've never seen anyone reject it. Okay, so we'll just leave that there. But you have those guys, the two kingdoms, they're recovering natural law, they're doing two kingdom theology, but then somehow they tweak it to make it so that, well, if we say the church is the only redemptive sphere, Therefore, we can't redeem the rest of creation. It's only a matter of individuals within the church who are redeemed. And that's kind of, they're siloed off from any sort of Christian, adjective. Let's say you can't have Christian nations. Yeah. But the thing you have to understand with the two kingdom guys, they were responding to the Kuyperians and the transformationalists. This is when I read someone like Van Drunen, he has in mind the debates from, I guess, the 80s and 90s and earlier against the theonomists, against the neo-Calvinists, and he's responding to those guys. And for most of his books, I've read most of his books, he tends to be responding to those guys, which is kind of frustrating because 15 years ago, you had the Davenant Institute. Back then it was called the Davenant Trust. They were the first ones, to my knowledge, to begin recovering a classical conception of two kingdom theology. And so particularly like Brad Littlejohn was doing this. And I think Brad Littlejohn in, Politics of After Christendom by Van Drunen, I think Brad got like a footnote. But still, like, it's as if these 2K guys think that the only opponent is these neo-Calvinists, these transformationalists. They think they've recovered the Reformed tradition against these innovators, which they have not. So you with all these dynamics, these different players, these different ideas, to my mind, they were still missing it. They were responding to each other. So the Kuyperians were trying to have a more activist church in politics. The two kingdom guys were trying to resist the activism in politics by appeal to the Reformed tradition against the neo-Calvinism, in a sense, a sort of neo-old Calvinism, I guess you can call it, or a neo-paleo-Calvinism. But they actually, in the sense, they're getting things right, but in the end, they were not actually on the mark. And so what we're trying to do in this report, what my work is trying to recover actually a path in which you can say, yes, there's a twofold kingdom. Yes, you can distinguish nature and grace. Yes, you can make all those distinctions within the Reformed tradition, but that doesn't preclude you from saying that you can have a Christian nation with Christian magistrates, that you can have citizens as Christians trying to have a public religion that orders people or promotes Christianity. So that is kind of the big background, I guess, if I said any of that correctly. That is the big background to my work, and that's how I see this report is really a sort of recovery of an older tradition that I think is more, you could say, more faithful to the tradition, but it's not simply us, laying out the tradition. So in that sense, it's not a report of like, here's what everyone said. It's actually making the argument as well. We're making the arguments for this position, and you can clearly see that, particularly in actually all the chapters except, Sean's, which is the American Presbyterian chapter, which is far more of a historical account, which does actually help us in the broader thesis. So that's kind of, I think I see that as like the background that we're up against. There is an unfortunate tendency within the Reformed world. On one side, again, the two kingdom guys, they want to say you can't have a Christian nation, but they don't fully grasp how you can order the earthly to the heavenly. And on the Kuyperian side, they tend to want to collapse everything together. So you've got the distinctions that end up being separationism between nature and grace, between church and state. It's like a separationist sort of mentality. And then the other side, you have a sort of collapsing things together in ways that start making it look as if the church and state are not actually distinct, ways that kind of work against the tradition, distinguishing nature and grace. Whereas what we have shown, both historically and I think through sound political theory and political theology, is you can hold all those distinctions of the old days from the old days, and at the same time say, yes, you can have a Christian nation. Yes, you can have Christian schools. Yes, you can have Christian magistrates. They're not redeemed as such. They're not redeemed in the same sense that that an individual is redeemed. It doesn't collapse the state into the church. It doesn't violate the mission of the church. It's simply mutually supporting, within their own various spheres, according to their own powers, but mutually recognizing and mutually supporting. So that's kind of what we did. Yeah. So other stuff we can bring up on this. I first want to say, I meant to say this earlier. I'm very grateful to all the people who in the background supported this and made this possible. Jacob Honeycutt's already said that he publicly said that he was the editor. He did a great job. I was really impressed, and it's also humbling. It's like, wow, this kid who's like early 20s is showing me how to do grammar. I was really impressed by his work. And if there are any errors in this text, and I know there are, it's my fault. Trust me. Just you can blame it all on me. It's not his fault. Maybe I didn't accept that edit he suggested, and I should have, or I missed something in the footnotes. So it's all blame me. Everything that's good in terms of grammar in this report is because of him. Another guy who has not gone public helping us, he put the website together. Amazing job. I'm very appreciative of his work. And of course, Sean and Zach helping me put this all together. And we hope that it will serve the church and it will spark conversations. We hope people will read it honestly and they'll take it as arguments, that they will not just, it's like akin to like clipping something. You clip a video and it makes make the guy sound horrible or bad or stupid in some way. But if you look at the full clip, you realize actually what he was saying was smart or fine or whatever. People are going to do that with this text. They'll find a line, they'll find a few lines, they'll find a paragraph. They won't, such as the one that they, were beating me up on for like on last Saturday. They took out the line before it. They don't understand the broader argument. They don't understand the terms that are being deployed, even though I define all those and make that clear within the broader text. So what I hope is people will read it carefully and they'll respond with actual arguments and not this sort of gotcha journalism. I mean, that's kind of what Twitter has become in a way. It's like, I'm going to uncover what we already suspect, and I'm just going to clip it out and post it out there and make everyone look horrible and insinuate certain things. I spent a lot of time on that Reformed Theory chapter. It's not perfect. But I refuse to read it again just because I know I'll find the imperfections. I spent a lot of time on that chapter. And again, what I hope is that people will take it seriously, or at least if they're going to read it at all, they would respond with good reasoning against it. So, yeah. The other thing that we wanted to address within this report, and you see it reflected in the introduction, that is that we need a more systematic understanding of politics. We Presbyterians, we Calvinists in general, we prize this idea that we have these robust theological systems. We have systematic theologies, that our theological statements actually matter. Getting the doctrine of God right matters. Stating justification by faith, the way we state it, matters. We don't want to state it in a way that's sort of accurate, but then very imprecise and could lead here and there. We've seen it with, for years when people address the Federal Vision folks, where they're just trying to get them to say certain things in a theologically precise way. There's a lot of demand for that. And I think as I've studied politics and political theory in the Christian world and the Christian tradition, I think we have to follow our tradition's example and be just as precise in our political thought. Now, theology is different than politics in the sense that theology you produce what you might call is like absolute statements. When you make a statement about defining justification by faith, you're saying this is true and you ought to believe it. Absolutely, right? Absolutely meaning there's no prudence involved in whether you accept that or not. There's no contingency involved with you accepting this or that theological statement. That's how theology works. You produce, as through your thinking, through reflection on Scripture, you produce theological statements that you ought to believe or you ought not to believe. There's no sort of contingency in there. In politics, it is a realm of contingency. So that means that the sort of things you're going to do in the world, just like in ethics, just like when you step out your front door, you are going to dress in the sort of way that is suitable for the thing you're about to do. If my son is about to go play baseball, he's going to be wearing his baseball stuff. That's suitable for the sort of thing he's going to do. It's like, so what you wear is not an absolute thing you must do all the time, but it's contingent upon, the sort of thing you're going to do. Theology is not like that. Politics is like that. However, in politics, all that concerns like the means to an end. So if you craft a piece of legislation, of law, you're considering what ought we to do within this context, given the contingencies and circumstances, to then reach the end. But that's in the realm of means. Contingency occurs within the means. But that's not true for your principles. That's not true for the source or the means by which you think about the means, your political reasoning. It's not true of the ends. So if one of the ends of civil government is promoting true religion, that doesn't commit you to any sort of particular action that you ought to do, because you're in the realm of contingency. Some things are different. If you're in Puritan New England, that's different than being in, that's different than you being at the Constitutional Convention, in 1787, or the Federal Convention debates. What you're thinking through in that situation are different circumstances than if you're in 1635, Massachusetts Bay Colony. So when you're in a realm of contingency, which means that the way you fulfill the end is going to look different, but the end is still the same. That is, the end is that you are promoting true religion to the best extent possible given the circumstances. So the principles and the ends of politics, the principia, that is the fundamental principles of politics, will remain the same. They are absolute. But again, the means are different. So theology is different than politics. But my main point is that to understand the principles and the ends, you have to delineate those out into a sort of political system. You have to think through and determine what are the principles by which you act in political life. It's the same thing in ethics. Same thing with your own individual actions. You have moral principles that you have to apply in particular situations, but those moral principles are fixed. The end that you're seeking, like if you're seeking the end, or if the end is for, let's say, the good of your own children, well, you're probably going to treat each child a bit different. How do I maximize the good of this child given his personality, his age, whatever it is? You're still seeking that objective good, that absolute good for that child. But the means by which you do it is going to be different because the child's different than your other child. It's the same thing in politics, a world of contingency. You're applying the same moral principles to reach the same moral end, but it's based upon means. You have to select upon the means according to prudence. So again, the point is that we have to then have the principles. We have to then have the ends. We have to decide upon those things, and then we enter into the contingency to make decisions. I just don't think, I think there's this sense, and when you think of what I mean by system two is that we have to consistently apply the principles. If you are a two kingdom guy and you're separating or you're distinguishing nature and grace between earthly life and heavenly life, then when you enter into politics, which is fundamentally earthly, then you have to consistently apply the natural principles. You have to consistently apply the principles of earthly life. That's fundamental to a two kingdom thought, right? The church is a divine institution that has its own, its own offices, its own order, its own means, its own ends, which are all supernatural. It's a supernatural institution that is distinct from the state. The state is fundamentally natural. It has earthly means, which would be, again, like coercion or the civil sword. And its ends, its principal end would be a virtuous and peaceful commonwealth. So you have to make that distinction. What this means then, if you think that civil government ought to be, say, secularist, because you're basing that on the idea that, well, it's natural institution, grace and supernatural religion is something distinct from what is natural, or you could say it's adventitious. If you're going to say that, okay, fine, I disagree with you in your application of that, but you have to be consistent. If you're going to go and then say, oh, Christians ought to be multiculturalist because heavenly life is multicultural, all of a sudden you apply nature to get secularism, but then you bring in this foreign element that violates your own principles in order to achieve multiculturalism. You say, as Christians in the public square, we should not seek for government to promote true religion because it's a natural institution. On the other hand, you say, well, we as Christians in the public square ought to promote, multiculturalism because after all, in heaven's going to be multicultural. After all, the church itself is multicultural. So you have to be actually consistent in your own application of principles. And from what I could tell, what I've seen for years is an utter inconsistent application of these principles, especially among two kingdom guys. Not all of them do this, but a lot of two kingdom guys do this, where they're very serious about secularism based upon a natural order, but then they just bring down these heavenly principles in order to inject their preferred political environment, which is very modern and multicultural. It doesn't actually make sense. Now, the Kuyperians and some of the theonomists can kind of get away with this because they've already conflated the categories. They've already conflated natural and supernatural. They've already conflated earthly and heavenly. And so they can just kind of throw out whatever they want. I'm sorry. I know you guys are out there. It's just the fact that you guys can often not have a clear set of principles and understanding and the distinguish between all these things. And you just kind of throw stuff together in order to get your desired end. What's actually fascinating between those two sides I mentioned earlier is how both sides tend to agree on the end. And the end is basically liberalism. Isn't that strange? It's one of the surprising things. It's one of those things that's at first not intuitive because you think these guys are fighting over something. Really, they're fighting over the proper means to the same end. The modern two kingdom guys want essentially modern liberalism, by which I do not mean, Hillary Clinton or Bill Clinton or, Barack Obama. I just mean that they think that that America is a mere human place. There's not a whole lot of room for a particularity of people and place. There's no room for sort of ethnic or cultural claim to a place. It must be just merely human who affirms certain propositions. That's most modern 2K guys are going to be on that side. Then you talk to some Kuyperians and it's exact same thing. I mean, there might be some differences. I mean, take like a James K.A. Smith. I know he's gone goofy, but 10, 15 years ago, Gospel Coalition was just obsessed with the guy. He was basically just a sort of moderate Democrat, what we used to call a blue dog Democrat. Was there any significant difference between the 2K guys who are kind of center-right-ish and like the Kellerite, neo-Calvinists? Like actually on the ground in terms of the actual political application, their vision for the United States is essentially the same. The only difference is the Kuyperians want a more activist church and the modern 2K guys don't. It's like in the end, it's the same thing. They're all the same, but they fight. It's like, it's very kind of strange how they're simply just fighting over the same the different means to the same end. It strikes me as, again, and this is why, like, I have been attacked from all those guys for a number of reasons, but the common attack that I receive is that simply I'm just not a liberal. I mean, that's functionally what it is. I'm not a modern liberal. If you want to say I'm a classical liberal, okay, whatever. That's most classical liberals, self-identified classical liberals are just modern liberals. I mean, if you're going to take your political philosophy from John Locke, you're going to be essentially based, or you're essentially going to be cut off from polite society. You've just adopted a free market modern liberalism. It's just modern conservatism with low taxes. It's the same thing. All right, I'm rambling on. I'm going to move on. All right, so let's get back to the report. I apologize for kind of rambling on a bit there. So the introduction. The introduction is, I wrote the introduction, and it does cover this a bit, that pretty much everyone's a liberal except for us. And in the introduction, the main part is me just trying to delineate what it means to promote true religion. What does it mean? How do you break it down? How do you separate things? One of the criticisms that I've received a lot is this assumption. They assume that if you affirm that civil government ought to promote true religion, then therefore you want to go back to Geneva. If you quote Calvin in support of the principle that civil government ought to promote true religion, well, then guess what? You're going to then be accused of wanting, 16th century Geneva. The problem is none of that actually follows. So in the introduction and the second half, I describe a difference between the genus of act, the species of act, and the individual act. I don't want to go into all the particulars and what that means. You can read that in the report. But what it means is that you can have a fundamental principle, but it's applied differently in different situations. Again, you can be in 17th century New England and you can be all Congregationalists, and a bunch of Baptists show up and they say, look, Baptists, you can be members of our churches. Like you're brothers. And they did this, by the way. This read John Cotton. They did this. We're fellow believers. Like we're all in the invisible church. We don't deny you just because you have a different view of baptism. We don't deny that you are Christians. However, in our political society, when we came over here in our colony, particularly in Boston, we're going to be Congregationalists. We're going to be Paedo-Baptist Congregationalists. That's why we came over here. That's why we're here. And then you show up off the boat and, well, we want to send you back simply because you're Baptist. But you know what? You're not going to be allowed to have your own churches. You can't have your own churches. Now, why can't they have their own churches? Well, you have 90-something% of the people are Congregationalists, Paedo-Baptists. And then all of a sudden you have a group of people who are very loud in saying that actually none of those churches are true churches. None of you people are properly baptized. Your alleged Christian magistrate is actually not actually baptized. And so as Cotton Mather said, the Baptists tended to unchurch the churches of New England. And you know what? We're just not going to have that. Again, you have full rights to the preaching and the ministry of the word and Lord's Supper and membership and all the rights to that, except you cannot have your own churches. Now that's different. Obviously that's a unique case, but that I think is a proper application of the principle of promoting true religion as it fits with the civil context at that time. Now you fast forward 150 years and you are trying to create a government of 13 colonies, each having in general different fundamental, basic religions from Anglican to Quaker to Congregationalist, and then some that have a sort of scattering of different Protestant denominations. You have Maryland with some Roman Catholics. All right, what are we going to do now? Are we going to establish a Presbyterian church as a national church of the United States? Or are we going to recognize, wait, that's not going to work. If we did that, it would cause chaos. It would break us apart. But we need to be together because we need to have the energy both to project outward in our foreign policy, and we need the energy inward so that we don't destroy ourselves. And we need to secure liberty, all that sort of thing. How are we going to put this thing together for the general welfare of our people, that is the American people? And they said, well, we're going to have this federal system, and the First Amendment's going to prevent any sort of established church at the national level so that the anti-federalists are not scared. And we can just allow religion to be a matter of the states, and then they can decide what they're going to do. That's very different than Boston in 1630 and 1640. That's very, very different, obviously, because the circumstances were different. And in fact, and I think some people are like this, some people will say that we ought to go back to Geneva. And I guess in certain circumstances that would be fine. But if you're just saying that now in the American context, and that's going to be part of a national program, just don't see that working. That wouldn't have worked in 1787. When they were crafting the Constitution, that would not have worked. It wouldn't have worked in probably all of American history, all the way back to early America. And so that would actually not have promoted true religion. If somehow the Presbyterians took power and in 1787 decided that we are going to be a Presbyterian confessional nation, well, guess what? Very quickly, you would not have had a nation. People would have broken off. Certainly the Virginians would have said, nope, we're not doing that. And in fact, no one would have done that. Colony. So on apart. And in some cases, position within politics, you cause strife. It could cause the overthrow of the state you're seeking, right? Because all of politics, as I said, is a means to an end. When it comes to your actual politics, it's a means to some end. Just like church establishment. Church establishment in itself is just a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. So if conditions are suitable such that having an established church would promote true religion, we'll then have an established church. If conditions are not suitable for that, and if in fact it would actually lead to not the promotion practically of religion, but something else, then you shouldn't have church establishment. That's how politics works. And this is my criticism of a lot of establishmentarians. I mean, for decades, you've had these sort of establishmentarians floating in the background of all these debates saying, we should have an established church. But this is where they're deficient. Again, all they're identifying in their politics is just one means among many. They haven't identified the principle. They haven't identified the end that is sought. They haven't worked through that all. All they are affirming absolutely is one means, and that's it. They're treating establishment as an end in itself. When you ask them what are what is their Christian political views, it's like, I'm establishmentarian. Okay, well, that's deficient. Because in itself, that's just a means that doesn't identify the broader system of political thought. So anyway, that's that's my main point within the first half of the second half of the introduction, to just lay that out. You've got the principle, but it'll be different in different situations. And in the American context, for pretty much all of American history, religion was a matter of the state or local government. But at the same time, this is not an excuse for you to be coward. For cowardice, this is not an excuse for you not to act. You ought to assess the circumstances and see what you can achieve given the circumstances. And a lot of times that might just mean you're doing some sort of Sabbath law, and maybe more as time actually proceeds. So anyway, I've rambled on a lot about this stuff. I think some people have sent in some questions. We'll cover other stuff later. We'll cover more of my Reformed Political Theory chapter a little bit later, but I can answer some questions about the report. Were you surprised by anything in the American Presbyterian chapters? Do you see any legitimate progress or decline as we move out of Reformed scholasticism and into the American context? So Sean's, well, I'll get to Sean's in maybe next week, but Sean did the chapter on the American Presbyterians on civil government. It begins around page 50, 55, something like that. And his main intent for that chapter was to show that actually most American Presbyterians affirm the principle that government ought to promote true religion. They denied certain species of acts quite often. So they would deny like church establishment and some other things, but nearly all of them believed in Sabbath laws. And there are exceptions, of course. There's like surprisingly, like Dabney is one. I do think after reading some of these Presbyterians that they were actually deficient on their understanding of politics. Actually, I believe that. I know that sounds arrogant, but I think that there was, I just don't think they're as solid as we've seen elsewhere in the tradition. But I have to say though, I have to say that I'm not as well versed in American Presbyterian political thought as Sean. So if he were here, he might have a different take on that. But I think people actually should be surprised who are in the NAPARC world who think that the modern church-state relationships that we've grown up in are actually not the standard views of the 19th century Presbyterians or the 18th century Presbyterians. And they would actually themselves, as Sean points out, nearly all of them would violate the system of political theology argued for by the modern two kingdom guys. So yeah, so really when it comes down to it, they have very few people they can claim within our tradition, and they really only fit well within a post-Warren Court era. And frankly, I say this in the introduction, like seems like it's sort of, at best, a sort of happy accident that a secularist view of government just happens to flow once we, properly do reform political theology. It's just, prima facie, it's just sort of incredible. But that doesn't mean they're wrong. Like, that argument doesn't prove that they're false. It just should, like, we should, instead of being excited that we found a theory that is, rooted in the tradition, and it just happens to fit all of our political priors from our socialization of the 1980s and 1990s, that should cause some suspicion. Now, if people were to say, look, I think actually we need to have these sort of modern liberal, like, we need to contend with multiculturalism, or they might say something like, you can actually have a flourishing society under multiculturalism, and they can make the sort of sociological argument for that. I could, within my framework, I could make that argument and it would be consistent. But these guys are not, like, looking at on the ground evidence that it would work. They are creating a political theology that antecedently limits what politics can do from the get-go. So you have this theological understanding that is prior to the politics, that then when you get to the politics, it limits it in ways, almost entirely in the way that you'd find in a post-Warren Court era. So anyway, let's see. Oh no. How did we get to the point where the traditional understanding of politics was lost? Hey, that's my friend Michael asking that. Yeah. I mean, partly it was buried in Latin, that people were not able to recover from it. It's also, yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think that's probably a good question for, like, someone who studies American history. I think it's the loss of probably scholastic categories, the fact that people don't read Aristotle anymore, but also that it's just kind of sort of buried in Latin and people were not able to access it. And then after World War II, there was only one game in town, which was just some version of liberalism, whether it's going to be sort of a progressivist liberalism, you might call it, or a conservative form, the post-war conservatism. But yeah, I'm not entirely sure, Michael, about that. What is the path back to 17th century political? What is the path back to 17th, 18th century Christian politics? Currently studying con law in law school, and it's pretty depressing how much Supreme Court has changed our country. Yeah. What's fascinating about the Supreme Court on religion is that the Warren Court began to cite people like Madison and Jefferson, even though they were arguably not as important in the founding era when it came to religion than people actually suppose. And if you look at the citations within American jurisprudence, they're cited far more on this question after World War II than before. And so, yeah, the thing is, though, like, when we talk about a 17th and 18th century understanding of Christian politics, well, what I want to recover is, again, not like going back to like late 16th century Geneva. So in terms of the practice of politics, I'm not really interested in that because that's not going to happen anytime soon. I'm more interested in recovering the system of it, that we understand that politics fundamentally is a natural thing, and we are political animals. Humans as political animals, we get together in society for our mutual good. We're driven to do that by instinct and reason. We get together and we form a political community that is so that we can participate in political life and we can deliberate upon the good and we can make decisions. And typically those decisions are made through people we install as our magistrates or their kings or representatives or whatever it is that is natural to us as human beings to do that. And so it's fundamentally natural. We're pursuing our life together in political life, principally for the earthly goods. That is principally in terms of the actual objects, the number of objects. There's a lot more objects of good in politics regarding earthly life than heavenly life. So that's the main reason why we get together. But the highest and the most, I guess you could say, the principal object would be that we would support each other in true religion. And so that would then come to influence our politics as well. So you think of ourselves as a political animal, also as a religious being, that our religion is not private, but it's also public. And that would come to reflect in society itself. The other thing too is that we are built to receive a sort of second nature. So this is a really important concept. So fundamentally, we are all human beings, obviously. We have all the essential attributes of human beings and we share all those sorts of accidental ones as well. But we also live in a particular community of a particular people. And so we come to assume the mannerisms, the speech, the customs, the traditions, heritage. We understand everything from the weather of where we live to the soil. We have a common understanding of what's sacred, what's sacrilegious, what's profane. And all that stuff we, from socialization, come to assume as second nature, and it becomes a sort of habit. So, when you open a door for a person, you don't think about doing that. You just do that because that's what you do, having good manners. That's part of social expectations. It's part of your habits. That's all part of your second nature that you've received as a human being designed to have a particular way of life. That, I think, is something largely lost nowadays, because all of our politics is ordered around mere humanity. That there's no sense of a collective we, and that we, that is the people themselves, have a commonality as to second nature. And this is, by the way, why people tend to gravitate towards those who are similar to them. I mean, down the road from me, near Raleigh, you have whole neighborhoods that are all Indian. Did they just all happen randomly choose a house and it just happens to be they're all Indian? No. They chose that neighborhood because then they're around people who have a sort of common second nature in which they can live in confidence. That is confidence because they know what to do. They know how to relate to people. They can communicate properly, not only through words, but through the sort of mannerisms that they mutually understand of each other. It's perfectly natural for people to do that. And why do they do that? Why is that important? Well, because it maximizes their good to their minds, to be around people who are common to them. That, again, you can go through life around people who understand you well, and the sort of people you have common expectations with. Anyway, I think that's one thing that's lost. Yeah. All right. Are there any other, let's see what we got here. My politics is that we should do good things and not do bad things. Yeah. That's right. Now, what I can talk about next week when I talk about my Reformed Political Theory chapter is we do need to learn to distinguish ethics and politics. Someone the other day said that my politics is love your neighbor as yourself, and live at peace with all men. I will just take the one, live at peace with all men. Now, you can see how those can extend into politics, but fundamentally those are commands of ethics, which means that you as an individual ought to live at peace with all men. So no matter what circumstance you're in, you ought to seek the peace in those circumstances. But that's an ethical question for an individual. You can seek to live peace with people as an individual, but if you're in charge of a commonwealth, if you're in charge of ordering a people as a multitude, as a group of people, then you have to seek the peace of that city, of that multitude as a collective entity. That's why you do a lot of things in politics, in order to seek the peace of them. So if one of those things is, well, it's probably good if we don't have demographic replacement in order to maintain the peace of a commonwealth as such, well, then as a magistrate, you probably should try to limit that sort of replacement. Now, if you are, as we are today, subject to something like that, yeah, as an individual, you ought to seek the peace of those around you. That doesn't mean it translates into politics. Just like, you can't become a vigilante and exact justice on someone who's wronged you. What do? You have to call the authorities, and the authorities send them through the process. Different responsibilities. Politics and ethics are not the same. So, okay. I think I got this. All right. Oops, man, it's so over. Sorry about that. I gotta energy up here. We just thought so. We did not seek to. We didn't mention the See and Study report anywhere within the in the document. That it's coming out, I guess, in a month or so. We just thought that there's a general interest in the subject of Christian politics, and this is clear from them having this study report. And then there's also signs that the OPC might have a study report on nationalism as well, and so that's very exciting. We'll see what they can produce. I have not actually, to answer your question, no one has reached out to me. There's some people online, I guess, people who have insider information into the study report. I think it would be nice if they're going to directly criticize me, if they would actually show me what, like send to me what your critiques are. Because I've written a lot, I've said a lot, and part of that is clarification. Part of that is to, sort of explicate things I say. And so I would hope that they would reach out, but no, they did not reach out to me. No, nothing yet. Yeah, if you want to hear my take on what my predictions for the PCA study committee, there's a video on my YouTube about that. I didn't join an OPC church just in time for them to blacklist Ian. Yeah. Yeah, but again, like this, I know we call it a report, but it just seems as if there's an interest, and so we wanted to do our own report, not so much against the PCA report, but to issue our own in ways that we thought would be best. Are you going to PCA? Oh yeah, I do plan on going to the PCA General Assembly. My schedule is filling up. In fact, today I got 2 invites for speaking gigs, but I do plan to go there. And oh, by the way, that I'm actually looking at it right now. The editor is now working on the book, and I'm looking at it through the screen right here. Again, this is going to be published in print. The pre-order is going to be very soon, very, very soon. I'm hoping tomorrow, but we'll see what happens. You'll be able to order a book, and you'll be able to get the whole thing. There'll be a preface in it. Hopefully there'll be a forward if I can get my friend to actually finish it. And we'll see how it goes. I should say, a lot of you guys who have stuck it out this far and heard me ramble for about an hour, a lot of you guys contributed to the $5,000 that we got. Literally within 24 hours, we got $5,000 on the Give, Send, Go thing. I really appreciate that. I initially was going to put down $1,000 because I was like, there's no way we can get more than $1,000. But we got $5,000 in like 24 hours. It's amazing. So thank you for that. I'm very appreciative of that. So we're going to be able to give seminarians and graduate students and maybe college students discounts on the book, half off and maybe free shipping. So they're going to get the book for like $10 or $11. I don't want to jump the gun there, but it's going to be very low, around that amount. And so if you are in seminary and you want, like, if you let's say you saw this book, you read this book, or you've heard about the book, maybe you read the book and found some things wrong with it, which there are a few things wrong with it, and you want to get something that's more advanced or more precise and it corrects all, I think, my errors, pick up this book and read chapter 1. It's like, it's more advanced. If I'm ever allowed to do a revised edition of this, I'm going to apply a lot of what I say in there into this. So that is my more mature, let's say my more mature account of politics. And literally it's the thing that I'd hope people would read first, knowing, and like read that first, and you get it really precise and you understand my politics. And then you can go to this for some of the other stuff about nations and some other things. So, all right. Are there any other questions? Any other questions? Otherwise, I'm going to head out. If you go to the General Assembly, which I plan to go to, and you have your book, I'll sign it. We can even do it in the back room so no one sees. Oh, I know what I want to say. I should say this every single week. Look, I've said this on my video before. I've said this on my YouTube many times. If you are watching the OPC, PCR, just the general NAPARC world when it comes to politics where you don't affirm fundamental liberal commitments, and you say certain things, people are going to attack you. You're going to perhaps lose positions. You may not get a call. And what you guys ought to do is look, I mean, other people say this who are better talkers than me, and you might listen to them. You could sort of hide the power levels. Don't just say whatever you think all the time. Read the stuff and just wait for your time to come. Okay. It's insane what I've been accused of by people. And if they can do it to me, even though I think a lot of these things I'm pretty clear, or at least a charitable reading of something would make it so you wouldn't accuse me of this or that. If they're going to do it to me, they're going to do it to you. I mean, the best thing that they have right now is the gatekeeping. I say this I say this with confidence. They don't have the arguments. They don't have the arguments. They don't have the arguments. They don't have the tradition. It's very clear to say that they just have modern liberal commitments and they're trying to squeeze their theology and politics into their socialization that they received from the 1980s and 1990s. I know that sounds like it's arrogant. I can't help but say it's true. I've seen enough. It's true. So over time, we're just going to have to commit ourselves to these arguments, support one another, and don't be stupid in public and get yourself hurt or prevent you from moving up and getting that position, whether it's in the church or in a university or wherever it is. If you are not sufficiently liberal, you're going to be suspect. So, all right, we'll leave it on that. All right. I will see you guys next week. Talk about reform political theory. And so until next time, I'll see you guys later.